Not sure which stitch is best for sewing stretchy knit fabrics? I'm going to compare a variety of options and reveal my #1 secret to strong and stretchy seams on a sewing machine. Hi, I'm Adrienne from Sew PDF. I've been sewing for about 25 years, and for the past 5 years, I've been designing and marketing sewing patterns. My goal is to make sewing easy and fun. So before we dive into stretch stitches, I just want to explain quickly why it's necessary to use a stretch stitch with knit fabrics. Most garments that are made with knit fabrics need to stretch. The neck hole needs to stretch in order to pull the top or dress over your head. The sleeve hem or cuff needs to stretch in order to put your arm into the sleeve, and so on. A tight garment like leggings even needs to stretch everywhere while you're wearing it. If your thread in the stitches does not allow your fabric to stretch as much as it can or as much as it needs to, what will happen is a popped stitch. One stitch will break from the tension on it, and then the entire seam will start to unravel. I have even had this happen on loose dress hems. Even though the hem didn't need to stretch while I was putting the dress on, the hem would get caught on something, even me sitting on the hem as I was trying to get up, and the hem would stretch and a stitch would pop. A straight stitch has very minimal stretch to it and will pop very easily, while a stretch stitch will stretch with the fabric and prevent this from happening. So let's talk about specific stitch types. When I first started sewing with knit fabrics, I used a lightning bolt stitch. This is available on most modern machines and is a very commonly recommended stitch for knit fabrics. So I've got a sample here to show you. And as you can see, this stitch is shaped like a lightning bolt. And it does in fact achieve a very stretchy seam without excessively showing stitches on the outside. Now I've used a thread that is a different color from this fabric, so it's going to be a little more obvious, but when you use a thread that matches, it's not going to show really at all. But as you'll see later, this is more of an issue on some other stitch types with the stitches showing really obviously. So with the lightning bolt stitch, I found that my seams were occasionally popping a stitch, like I mentioned earlier with the dress hems. It just wasn't a strong enough stitch, though I would later discover a way to make any stretch stitch stronger, and I'll share that secret with you later in this video. Next, I moved on to a triple stitch, or also known as a stretch straight stitch. So this is essentially a straight stitch, but the stitch goes forward and backwards as it goes. This is the stitch that I currently use when I'm sewing knit seams on a sewing machine. And I find that it's really stretchy and really strong. And it doesn't show excessively on the outside either. But I don't tend to have any popped seams with this stitch type. I don't quite understand why the back and forth up and down makes such a difference over a regular straight stitch in how stretchy it is, but if you know why, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Any which way, it does definitely result in a really stretchy and strong seam. There are a couple of drawbacks to the triple stretch stitch though. First, if your machine is prone to stretching fabrics out of shape, this will be magnified by the back and forth motion, which means that the fabric is spending more time under the presser foot, and you will end up with wavy, stretched out seams. But if you've got your machine set up well for sewing knits, with the right settings and perhaps a knit foot or walking foot, then the triple stitch will work just fine for you. If you need more tips on machine settings, check out the video I've linked for you in the description. Second, the triple stitch is incredibly difficult to remove if you make a mistake and need to take your stitches out. It's not impossible. I have done it many, many times. But it is time consuming, and if your fabric is on the delicate side, you may have a hard time doing it without wrecking your fabric. The lightning bolt is also difficult to remove, but less so. So both of these stitches are common on modern sewing machines. But if you have an older machine or a super basic new machine, it might not have either of them. In this case, you are most likely limited to a straight or zigzag stitch. A zigzag stitch is naturally quite stretchy and is a great choice for sewing knit fabrics. However, you may need to play around with the stitch width and the stitch length in order to minimize the appearance of the stitches on the outside. As you can see, This is a fairly wide and long zigzag stitch. And from the outside, those stitches are really obvious. Even with a matching thread, they're going to be visible. It's nice and stretchy, there's no problem there. But in order to minimize the appearance of those stitches from the outside, you're going to want to narrow the stitches and reduce your stitch length. When you're using a zigzag, it's not as big of a deal to have a shorter stitch length. So here's a narrower zigzag, but still a fairly long stitch length. Again, quite stretchy. But again, those stitches are pretty obvious. So let's shorten that stitch length. You can see that's a shorter stitch length, a narrower zigzag. And it's a fair amount less obvious, the stitches from the outside. So those are the main stitches that would normally be used for construction of seams on knit fabric. The lightning bolt, the triple stitch, and the zigzag. But what about hemming or top stitching? You can use those options for that as well, but there are some other options such as a twin needle, and I also enjoy using the decorative honeycomb stitch for hemming and top stitching. If you'd like to see a video on these stitches, please let me know in the comments. Finally, I'd like to share my secret for making all of these stitches stronger. This is Maxi-Lock stretch thread, and it's intended mainly for use in the loopers of a serger. But you can use it in your bobbin, and it will give your stitches a little extra give and make them much stronger. Woolly nylon is another similar type of thread that can be used in the same way, but most experienced sewers seem to prefer Maxi-Lock stretch thread. I have heard that woolly nylon tends to shred more easily. Because it only comes in a cone, you can't wind it from a spool on your sewing machine onto the bobbin the way you would normally do. You can either wind it by hand, which will actually give it more stretch because there's no tension on it while it's being wound. Or you can just stick the cone on the table and hold it up with your finger and feed it through the tension and wind it on the machine. Sometimes if I want to fill a whole bunch of bobbins at once, I'll actually put my serger behind my sewing machine and stick the cones on the serger stand and feed it up through the serger guide and then down to the sewing machine tension wheel and through the bobbin. I do want to note that stretch thread doesn't come in as wide of a variety of colors as regular thread does, and it does tend to show through the stitches when it's used for top stitching because it's so thick. I prefer to use it mainly for seams, unless it's a good color match to the top thread that I'm using. You could also try messing with the tension in order to get the bobbin thread to be less visible, but if I'm being totally honest, that sounds like way too much work to me. So my favorite stretch stitch is the triple stitch. But the best way to figure out your favorite is to just grab some scraps, even cut up an old t-shirt if you don't have any knit fabric scraps, and try out all your stitches. Play around, figure out what works best for your machine, and results in a nice stretchy seam. And if you've got some occasional pop stitches happening with your favorite stitch, just try adding in the stretch thread in the bobbin. It works really well. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you'd like to see more videos